Should I apply for another mental health condition if I'm already rated for PTSD or depression or anxiety? Let's talk about it. Hey everyone, Andy Gross of Guide on Law, formerly known or also known as Law Office of Andrew P. Gross. We've rebranded, changing our name. Still the same firm, just with more people and a cooler name. Today I want to talk about VA disability and mental health conditions, and whether or not you should apply for another mental health condition even though you've got one mental health condition already rated. Now, I can't tell you what to do in your particular case, and this is not legal advice, but what I'm going to try to do is explain a little bit about how the system works when it comes to rating mental health conditions and why it may or may not make sense to apply for, say, insomnia if you're already rated for PTSD, or depression if you're already rated for anxiety. I am not a doctor. I'm not a psychiatrist, psychologist. I took sociology freshman year in college, but that's really as far as I took it. I do have a copy of the DSM-5, but I'm really going to defer to experts on this one. And if you want more talk on psychiatry and psychology, I encourage you to go over to my colleague, Dr. Prashant Sharma. He's a board-certified psychiatrist and a veteran. And he can talk about the science behind mental health all day and night. So please don't take it from me. But let's talk a little bit about the law behind mental health ratings. Veterans will often ask, hey, I'm at 50% for depression. Should I apply for PTSD? Or should I apply for insomnia secondary to my PTSD? And I tell them, probably won't make a difference. And here's why. You actually can't really get rated for more than one mental health condition at a time. What I mean by that is that if you have depression, the VA is not going to give you a separate rating for PTSD or anxiety. And if you have a rating for anxiety, they're not going to give you a second or different rating than PTSD. And to understand that, you really have to understand how the rating table itself works. So as you probably know, the VA rates everything based on what the Code of Federal Regulations says it should be rated at. And for mental health in particular, you're going to want to look at 38 CFR 4.130, or 38 Code of Federal Regulations, section 4.130. And in that section, it's actually going to list a whole bunch of mental health conditions. It's going to list actually like 30 different mental health conditions, from schizophrenia to unspecified anxiety disorder to depression to PTSD. And they actually all get the same type of rating. And that rating is the degree of social and occupational impairment. And it starts from, there's a diagnosed condition that has no social and occupational impact, to something that is totally socially and occupationally impairing. To figure out exactly what those definitions are, each one of those conditions actually has a set of symptoms. So for instance, total occupational and social impairment due to symptoms such as gross impairment in thought processes or communication, persistent delusions or hallucinations, grossly inappropriate behavior, persistent danger to hurting self or others, intermittent inability to perform activities of daily living such as maintenance of minimal personal hygiene, disorientation to time or place, memory loss for names of close relatives, their own occupation, or their own name. Again, that's a list of symptoms for the 100% or total occupational and social impairment rating. If you have a mental health condition that's rated and you claim another mental health condition on top of that, like let's say you have PTSD but you want to claim insomnia because you're having trouble sleeping, what's likely going to happen is the VA is going to look at that and go, what they're really asking for is an increase. What they're looking at, the actual sleeping problems, is actually usually in the 30 to 50% range. So again, you just got to take a look at what the ratings chart says. And the science behind this, and apologies to Dr. Sharma, who can definitely explain it better, is that there's kind of a Venn diagram of mental health conditions. Because if you have PTSD, you may experience depression. If you experience depression, you may experience anxiety. And what the doctors and medical providers call that is that they take an inventory of what's going on with you and they apply that to something called the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual. From what I've seen is that different mental health providers can come up with different conclusions as to what your diagnoses are, depending on how the symptoms are presenting that day or at that time. Because if you recall, the C&P examiners are only getting a snap in time of what is going on with you on that day, and they're reviewing the record somewhat. So it's a little challenging to really get a thorough diagnosis just from that. In fact, you'll often see a diagnosis in a medical record for depression, and then the person will change doctors and they'll start the next doctor will say, well, actually, I think this is more of an anxiety condition. And then the C&P examiner may take a look at it and go, you know what? I think actually they meet the criteria for post-traumatic stress. So it can go back and forth, but it's all talking about the same set of symptoms, which you can find on the DBQ if you want to take a look at what those are and kind of wrap your head around it. Here's where it gets tricky, right? Sometimes we wonder, well, what do I apply for? And sometimes you can apply for something as simple as acquired mental health condition. And that puts the burden on the VA to actually find whatever your diagnosis may be from the records or from their exams. This is sometimes what I recommend doing if you have if you haven't necessarily been to a lot of treatment or haven't been to treatment in a while, and you may not have a firm diagnosis of it. But if you're in treatment right now and your current doctor says you absolutely have PTSD and you submit those PTSD records to the VA, you're probably safe applying for PTSD. Again, I don't know what to do in your own particular situation. There's no bright line rule when it comes to this. So it's a problem. But don't worry. There's actually a law directly on point. No matter what mental health condition you apply for, whether it's depression, whether it's anxiety, whether it's PTSD or schizophrenia, the VA is actually supposed to look at all of the medical conditions or all the mental health conditions that your mental health condition could be or that are raised by the record. And that came up from a case called Clemens that was decided about 15 years ago. In the Clemens case, the person applied for one thing but didn't have the other, and the court said basically, hey, VA, the person applies for PTSD, but there's no PTSD diagnosis, but there is depression in the record, then the VA is supposed to look at that. Under Clemens, no matter what you apply for, the VA is supposed to look for other potential related conditions or conditions that the thing might be. So again, if you apply for depression, but it's actually PTSD, the VA is supposed to assess the PTSD. If you apply for PTSD, but you really have anxiety or insomnia, the VA is supposed to apply for that. So okay, this was a roundabout way of saying, hey, if you've got one mental health condition rated, the key isn't necessarily to apply for another mental health condition, but to look at your symptoms in 38 CFR or on the DBQ and to see what your symptoms are and to see if they match up with your rating. You can request your C&P exam from the VA. Again, take some time. You can FOIA that. Or if you have a VSO or an attorney, you can ask for your DBQ and to see if your symptoms are matching up with what is actually happening in your life. And if you have more symptoms that are not on the DBQ, well, you might consider filing some kind of appeal or a request for increase, just depending on where you are in the process. And just remember, if you disagree with a rating, you have 1 year from the date of the decision to appeal that rating through either a higher level review, supplemental claim, or appeal to the Board of Veterans Appeals. So if you've recently received a rating that you disagree with and you think that it's maybe incorrect and needs to be fixed, reach out to us at Guide on Law to see if we can help you. Until next time, take care.